we are meeting with the aggressor. We are meeting with the representative of a man who is indicted for war crimes, and quite rightly so. We are legitimating this war of aggression by meeting with the representatives of the aggressor state. And we are marginalizing the people, the nation, the Ukrainian state that were attacked. Negotiation could take place between Ukraine and Russia about peace. It can't take place between the United States and Russia about peace because the United States and Russia are not at war. If the United States wished to bring an end to this war, and if Mr. Trump is right that he has the power to end this war, the way that that would look would be that the United States would make it harder for the aggressor to fight and easier for the state that's defending itself, Ukraine, to do so. But that is not what we are doing. If anything, we are throwing our power on the side of the aggressor.
Donald Trump, and really his entire administration, have spent the past week speaking and acting in the most disgusting ways towards our ally in Ukraine, with criticism of President Zelenskyy, praise for Vladimir Putin. It has just been awful to watch after we had a real leader and President Biden, who united the country behind Ukraine, and not just the country but the world as well. And now Donald Trump is throwing that all away, and he made it very, very clear, of course, this week, but specifically in a post that he just made attacking President Zelenskyy, which led Zelenskyy to fire back at Donald Trump. And we're going to get into that all. But before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way, and it really does mean a lot to me now. Before we get into the post from Trump and the attack from Zelenskyy, I want to hear from Lawrence O'Donnell, who did a great job summing up this entire week of nonsense we've seen from the Trump administration.
We now know how different that would have been if the United States had a president like Donald Trump during World War II. Donald Trump broke with the United States allies fighting Russian dictator Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine by sending a delegation led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio to a meeting in Saudi Arabia to negotiate with the murderous dictator Vladimir Putin's representatives. Here's the way Senator Marco Rubio saw Vladimir Putin before becoming Donald Trump's Secretary of State.
A gangster in Russia is threatening NATO, threatening the unity of Europe, and now expanding his reach into the Middle East at our expense.
That is the way Winston Churchill and President Roosevelt talked about Adolf Hitler's march across Europe, invading every country along the way. The countries that are now unified against Vladimir Putin's Hitler-style invasion of Ukraine. Here's what Secretary Rubio said today about his meeting with the people who work for what he used to call a gangster in Russia.
I came away today convinced that they are willing to begin to engage in a serious process to determine how and how quickly and through what mechanism can an end be brought to this war. Whether we can ultimately reach that outcome will obviously depend on every side in this conflict's willingness to agree to certain things.
Just absolutely pitiful. That is our ally that you were speaking about. Those are Kremlin talking points that Donald Trump is pushing. And he's having Marco Rubio do it, who's clearly sold his soul. You can see it in his eyes. This is why I go back to how upset I am that so many Democratic senators voted to confirm him. We knew this was the person he was going to be, but that's a story for a different day. This is just a gross display. And of course, what we saw from JD, I don't need to get into it all because I'm going to talk forever about it. But what we do need to get into is the post Trump just made, because it might be his craziest yet. And then we're going to hear from President Zelenskyy. Trump wrote in a long Truth Social post. Think of it. A modestly successful comedian in President Zelenskyy talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go into a war that couldn't be won, that never had to start. But a war that he, without the U.S. and Trump, will never be able to settle the United States is $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed while the United States will get nothing back. Why didn't sleepy Joe Biden demand equalization is that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us. We have a big, beautiful ocean. As separation. On top of this, Zelenskyy admits that half of the money we sent him is missing. He refuses to have elections is very low in Ukrainian polls. And the only thing he was good at was playing Biden like a fiddle. A dictator without elections. Zelenskyy better move fast, or he is not going to have a country left in the meantime. We are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia. Something I'll admit only Trump and the Trump administration can do. Biden never tried. Europe has failed to bring peace. And Zelenskyy probably wants to keep the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelenskyy has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died. And so it continues. A dictator without elections. It sounds like you're talking about Putin. It sounds like you're talking about the person that you want to be Donald, and completely misunderstanding the way that we have provided aid to Ukraine in a war that is important to us. It is not just important to Europe, and the fact that Donald Trump can't understand that just shows how stupid he is. It's like when Republicans talk about we need Greenland because it's a strict strategic move for our foreign policy because of its proximity to Russia. What about Ukraine's proximity to Russia? These people are just dumb. I'm tired of acting like they're not. It's ridiculous, and it's the reason that President Zelenskyy fired back at Trump, calling out his stupidity right here.
3 years ago, next week, Russia invaded Ukraine, sending tanks and soldiers across the border and raining missiles and bombs down on Ukrainian cities. It had hopes to topple the capital in 3 days and absorb the entire country. It had 75% of its conventional forces postured against Ukraine. Russia deployed intelligence operatives from the FSB to forcibly replace Ukraine's elected leaders. U.S. intelligence believes it intended to kill the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Vladimir Putin, to justify the invasion, denied Ukraine's right to exist or even its history as an independent nation, which he continues to do today. Yesterday, President Trump said this was, quote, not a good war for Ukraine to get into, as if Russia's full-scale invasion was Ukraine's choice. It wasn't. And right up until the final days before the invasion, the Ukrainian leader was speaking to the French President, Emmanuel Macron, about a peace plan. Russian leaders took part in those discussions as well, even as they were massing their forces and Russian commanders were intercepted by Western intelligence finalizing their invasion plans. Many were understandably skeptical, given Russia had repeatedly violated peace plans and, let the record show, had already invaded Ukraine in 2014, taking possession of Crimea and parts of the east. I was in Ukraine during the invasion. And what struck me when I returned was the bipartisan outpouring of support for Ukraine against Russia. Then Senator, now Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, publicly questioned Putin's mental state and even chided skeptics of Ukraine's readiness to join NATO as those who, quote, either don't know what they're talking about or are lying, end quote. Then Congressman, now National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, said, quote, I think it's absolutely in America's interest to stop Putin cold, end quote. The facts of Russia's ongoing invasion are straightforward. Russia invaded Ukraine with the goal of taking over an independent nation. Those facts have not changed. Only the politics.
Unfortunately, President Zelenskyy has to be a little kind to Donald Trump and the way that he speaks. Of course, saying that he lives in a misinformation bubble and he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about is good. I wish he would have just said, Donald Trump is stupid. He's a period end. If sentence move on, that would have made me feel a lot better. But he knows that Trump is pushing Kremlin talking points, and it's absolutely disgusting to watch. And I could rant about how angry I am with this being the state of things. I got pretty upset yesterday thinking about how many Ukrainians have struggled, fought, and died over the past 3 years, all for Donald Trump to say, well, they've had a seat at the table for a long time. Just what a piece of garbage. Oh, but I think the best thing is to hear a little bit more of that conversation with Lawrence O'Donnell. I think he did a great job talking about this. I'm not going to be able to just because he gets me this situation of all of them really just is upsetting. So I want to hear a little bit more from Lawrence.
Joining us now is Timothy Snyder, professor of history at Yale University. He's author of the New York Times bestsellers On Freedom and On Tyranny. Professor Snyder, I just want to add one more thing that was said on this same day that Secretary Rubio said that, just to show us how Donald Trump has stacked the deck now against Ukraine, who he apparently blames for the war. Let's listen to what Donald Trump said today about Ukraine.
I think I have the power to end this war, and I think it's going very well. But today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal.
You should have never started it. He's saying that to Ukraine.
Yeah, it's ghastly. Ukraine was invaded by Russia in violation of every fundamental principle of international law. And the Ukrainians have resisted far better and far longer than anyone would have expected or had a right to expect of them. And by resisting, they've allowed the rest of us throughout the West, throughout the world, to have a chance to engage in more or less normal politics for the last 3 years. They've held off darkness for so many other people. So the contemptuous way that Trump is treating them is not only wrong, it's morally disgusting.
And you point out there's a difference between negotiating and talking. What do you see actually happening in Saudi Arabia?
The crucial thing here, as you suggested earlier, is that the Ukrainians are not actually present. It's a little bit like it's 1941 and the United States meets with Nazi Germany to decide the fate of Great Britain without inviting the British. That's where we are right now. We are meeting with the aggressor. We are meeting with the representatives of a man who was indicted for war crimes, and quite rightly so. We are legitimating this war of aggression by meeting with the representatives of the aggressor state. And we are marginalizing the people, the nation, the Ukrainian state that were attacked. Negotiation could take place between Ukraine and Russia about peace. It can't take place between the United States and Russia about peace because the United States and Russia are not at war. If the United States wished to bring an end to this war, and if Mr. Trump is right that he has the power to end this war, the way that that would look would be that the United States would make it harder for the aggressor to fight and easier for the state that's defending itself, Ukraine, to do so. But that is not what we are doing. If anything, we are throwing our power on the side of the aggressor, which is not going to bring peace. It's more likely to bring a longer and a bloodier war.
How does what we're seeing now compare to, say, what Henry Kissinger did in the Nixon administration that got the phrase shuttle diplomacy? Kissinger would talk to one side in the Middle East exclusively, and then Kissinger would go and talk to another side in the Middle East, and in the hope that could come together into something. It never did come together into something lasting in the Middle East, but there was that was a version of talking to one side at a time.
Yeah, I mean, there's no coherence to what the United States is doing formally. We've got a special envoy to Ukraine. We've got a special envoy to Russia. The special envoy to Ukraine wasn't at the talks in Saudi Arabia, just as the Ukrainians weren't at the talks in Saudi Arabia. The Americans speak publicly about what they're doing in ways that are totally contradictory, with some American officials saying that we'll strengthen Ukraine, all the way to Donald Trump saying Ukraine might not even exist at the end of this. So there's no coherence to this except the underlying formal problem that we've left the Ukrainians out of it entirely.
It is just sickening to hear this out of the Trump administration. As I always say, it's never surprising. It's always pretty disgusting. And that's a good way to sum up Donald Trump. And we got to keep calling him out. And we're going to on the show every single day. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button and leave a like on this video. And if you're stuck around at the end, you drop a blue heart in the comments. Until next time, I'll see you soon.